The Goonies never say die. Here's your look at the new NECA toys. This is The Goonies, Retro Cloth, Chunk, and Sloth. A group of young misfits who call themselves the Goonies discover an ancient map that might just lead to a secret pirate treasure. Now it's a race against time and the family of bumbling bad guys to find the gold and save their neighborhood from being turned into a golf course. Hey you guys, let's go ahead and get this review underway. I couldn't resist. We're going to go ahead and start first with Chunk, and then we're going to go to Sloth. While I'm doing this, because there's going to be a little bit of measuring going on, I'd like to send out a big thank you to the folks over at NECA Toys who were nice enough to send the sample my way. Chunk, very small Chunk, stands 5.5 inches in height. How does that translate, you may ask? Let me answer that with 14.1 centimeters tall. And let's switch that back to inches. This is always the part that becomes a little bit more problematic. Putting it right to the very top of Sloth. Certainly not problematic for you guys. You guys are simply just going to be watching and enjoying, hopefully, this review. I'm going to look forward to doing this review because I'm a big fan of the Goonies. Sloth stands 8.2 inches in height. I mean, he's about, well, he's not quite half taller. He's about, what, a third or so taller than Chunk. Anyways, in centimeters, that means Sloth, if I'm reading this right, stands 21 centimeters exactly. Okay, so let's have a look at the accessories that come included with it. One of the notable things from the beginning of this movie, that obviously figures are based from, is we have the statue with the prized piece. The part of the statue, unfortunately, has been broken off. Drawing your attention to this area right here. The statue itself, for a smaller piece, nice little depiction of the statue that it was in the film. There's what it looks like on the back. In a way, I'm kind of surprised that NECA Toys would have included this piece. When I think Sloth and I think Chunk, I wouldn't necessarily have thought the statue necessarily from the beginning of the film, but okay. Ironically enough, of all the things that they come included with, the thing I would have thought they would have been included with, like a bar of Baby Ruth, nowhere to be found. No Baby Ruth. No Baby Ruth. But the statue, like I said, is a little nice accompanying piece. If they ever released, like, Mouth, for example, okay, yeah, sure, Mikey, Mouth, at the beginning of the film, yeah, I could probably maybe include the statue for that. It's not that I'm making any of the decisions anyways. But for what it is, the inclusion of it's questionable maybe, but I do think it looks good as it did in the film. And we'll put that right over there. Included as well is a pair, not one, a pair means two, and you get two. They're not quite cutlass swords. They're smaller pirate kind of knives or daggers. They're almost identical to one another. They almost share the identical paint job. I'm sure this isn't a machine-driven process to paint these. They're probably maybe done by hand. So they're sort of in the way like snowflakes, in the sense that though science would prove to us later that that thing is just hooey. Snowflakes can be duplicate, triplicate. They all can look the same. They're not so unique that somebody is carving intricate snowflakes in the clouds like in that kind of stop motion movie Jack Frost. It doesn't work that way. Anyways, the point I was trying to make, though, is that your little swords may be unique in the sense that yours will look differently than perhaps mine. This one here looks slightly different than this one to the side, but it does seem like, if I'm putting the two side by side, blade to blade, hilt to hilt, it does seem like they are probably identical to one another. And one goes to Sloth, and one goes to Chunk. It's not specific, you can mix and match them. I'll show you guys that right now. I don't want to forget, after all. For Chunk, you can put the dagger, the knife, if you will, in either one of his hands. This hand's a little on the tighter side, so you just have to do a little bit of finagling to get that into Chunk's hand. And basically the same thing works on the other side as well. A little bit of finagling goes a long way in life, and a little bit of finagling can get most definitely the knife into Chunk's hand. Strange, again, no Baby Ruth. Anyways, put that down, and Sloth sort of works the exact same way, although his one hand is unique to the hand holding for knives. The other hand is just, willy-nilly. It's just loosey-goosey. And many other things we throw into the mix. So they do come with those. And then, of course, they want to be pirates, after all. So they do come included with their own specified hats. One goes specifically with Chunk. You can do the blizzard test if you wanted to, and you'll see that the hat is, in fact, not going anywhere. I don't feel as comfortable and confident doing that with Sloth. Sloth's hat does go onto his head, and sometimes it stays, sometimes it doesn't. Thank you. Thank you up there. It does stay in place. Sometimes, though, they're friction fitted. In other words, when you do snap them in place, you sort of sometimes can hear a snap, but there's other times I've done that. Yeah, the hat just falls right off. Hold on one second. Yes, I knew tempting Lady Luck would do me in. I should have just quickly done it, called it a day, but I got cocky, and that's what happens when you get cocky. Anyways, that's what they look like with their pirate hats on. The neat idea about it, though, is because they're just simply friction fitted, means that you're not disrupting and ruining any of the sculpt in favor of putting something in place where the hat has to be attached to their head. The other cool thing about that cats is the fact that you can't even remove the hats. So if you do want to have Chunk or Sloth respectively displayed without the hats, sans la hats, you can completely do that. Nobody is saying that you have to display them with hats. So let's have a look at the first figure. This is a 2-pack after all. Hopefully not the last time that we're going to be seeing Goonies be represented in retrocloth figure form. And I must say, in the last little while, I've perked up my peepers, and I've noticed that a lot of the retrocloth figures are really vastly improving themselves, not only on sculpt, but paintwork. Some of the earlier outings for retrocloth figures often caused sculpts, as good as they may have been, to appear slightly faded, distorted, or splotchy. But the paintwork on these pieces is quite nice. Chunk, who, of course, will be his claim to fame. I don't think Chunk really did much of anything else after the fact. The actor has lost some considerable weight, so he doesn't even look like Chunk would have looked if Chunk had grown up and you just thought, okay, well, this is what Chunk looks like grown up. No, you wouldn't even be able to point him out if there was a Chunk lineup. I think that would be really cruel if you were to have a lineup and call it the Chunk lineup. You'd have to probably tread quite lightly on that. But must say, that's a nice looking representation of Chunk the way he looks in the film. Truffle Shuffle, of course, you could put in there, I suppose, if you wanted to. Although there's not a whole lot of Chunk happening underneath the shirt. There is very little Chunk actually happening underneath the shirt. He's got his flower shirt, dress-up shirt there, his button-up shirt there. And he also does have his red windbreaker over top. The inner seam, the padding inside, I think there was additionally some white, but instead, like the jacket here, is just all red. Of course, he's got his kind of retirement outfit. Like, he's very much dressed like somebody in a senior citizen home, meaning no fault or negative comments towards people in senior citizens home. Sometimes they dress a lot cooler than I do. But back in the day, I mean, I would say Chunk dresses a bit on the older side with his choice of pants. Shoes, of course, nicely done there, sculpted as well. You've done in kind of a two-tone effect with slightly off-white. These aren't brand new sneakers after all. They can barely afford things as it stands, and they're at the risk of losing, of course, the neighborhood. It's going to be turned into a golf course, so they got to, like, quick, fast thinking, ultimately resulting in, of course, a treasure chest, a treasure quest to find One-Eyed Willie's gold. I guess you could probably have been thrown in some gold coins or maybe a chest of coins or something else as well. I mean, I'm just kind of wishing right now. It's a wish list of stuff I would have loved to see with these figures. Baby Ruth. I would have been happy with a Baby Ruth. But again, a nice little portrait there of Chunk. Proportionately, I think he's of a good size. His arms and legs are proportionate to the rest of his body. I really have no fault I could really make about the piece. Outdated, yes, in his attire, but I mean, if we all look back on what we wore when we were kids, I'd be embarrassed to admit some of the stuff that I wore when I was younger, and certainly the hair I was sporting back then. The bowl cut, anybody remember the bowl cut? Is basically quite not literally putting a bowl on your head and just trimming off the excess, but it might as well have been that. Some of the hairstyles back in the day as well, but I digress. Articulation-wise, on Chunk, his head rotates around and it hinges back and forth. I do find it's a bit on the loose side. It's almost as if his head isn't necessarily designed for this neck. It sits very, like I said, very loose, and there's quite an empty area in which there is head, but there's not necessarily neck, if that makes any sense. You can see on either side there. But it stays in place. I mean, you know, not that you would dangle your figures, and most definitely don't dangle small children by their heads. It's not going anywhere, so I mean, there you go. He has a waist swivel, no crunch or anything in this smaller sized retro cloth figure. His arms hinge outward, and you can rotate them forward and back. He has a bend in the elbow and a rotation in the hand. You know, your standard fare of posability on these figures. Legs split, they go forward and back, swivel on the top cut of the thigh, single hinge knee. And these figures, unfortunately, were before the days that NECA started what seems to be changing out the articulation on their ankles. The newer figures, like the Bob Ross we just recently had a look at, has somewhat of a ball joint happening at the base where the feet actually can hinge back and forth. These older figures, unfortunately, don't have that, or they use the older molds where, unfortunately, they don't have that articulation point in the ankle. Overall, good. I'm happy with Chunk. He's obviously best paired with Sloth. I mean, I guess you could have paired him with somebody else and maybe just done, you know, subsequent 2-packs of Goonies, you know, Data and Mikey and Mouth and all that. But, you know, if you are going to release a Sloth, I mean, Sloth is kind of really the cool thing about this set is that you do get yourself a Sloth. I think it would be logically making sense to include, of course, Chunk with that. So we're just going to move Chunk to the side and we'll have a look at Sloth. I loved Goonies growing up, and I rented it religiously, but as a kid, I gotta admit, Sloth freaked me right out. Probably had quite the number of nightmares, as probably most kids did when they first feasted eyes on the deformed Sloth. Even Superman couldn't have saved the look for Sloth, and I love the fact that he did wear a Superman t-shirt. Ripped, yes, in the sleeves, but he did wear a Superman shirt in the movie. Still gave me nightmares, and yet I still wanted to watch Goonies. Can I watch Goonies? You're going to have nightmares. I'm basically playing out the conversation I had with my mother. You're going to have nightmares. I'll be fine. What ended up happening? I had nightmares. Anyways, the head portrait is very faithful to the head portrait that he has in the film. Sort of a lopsided eyes hanging down his face, kind of like Shannon Doherty. Oh, we're going with the Shannon Doherty references again. Yes, he does have the slightly lopsided eyes, kind of like Shannon Doherty. Of course, you've got the quite mangled looking teeth. Some have sadly not grown in. Sort of a deformed character. Poor Sloth. But he was a hero in the end, and that's the important thing to take away for it. For, of course, whatever he's looked at as a monster on the outside, he's a good-natured guy on the inside. So really don't judge a book by its cover. I know that's such an old saying, but still holds true. Let Sloth be a good lesson to you. Even though you look like a mess on the outside and you look like a monster, inside, you're a good person, Mr. Sloth. So good job. Head portrait, though, is fantastic. I don't think I would have changed anything differently to it. It has the joy, he has the happiness in life that Sloth does have once he sort of breaks free and he's allowed to be friends and go out on the adventure with the rest of the Goonies and saves the day at the end. Good old Sloth. Still gives me nightmares, though. There's a lot of personality also happening in these eyes. I can't just help think that it's maybe the reflection off the lights of my studio lights coming off the eyes, but it definitely seems like there's a little bit of extra reflection that they put in those eyes. There's just a lot of personality happening here. Love the portrait. Paint doesn't disappoint. It delivers just as good the sculpt if the sculpt had no paint on it at all. And that's actually a statement to be made. Because again, like these retro cloth figures, I feel are vastly getting better and better with each time around. I was really happy with the Bob Ross. I'm really liking the look of both Sloth and Chunk. Of course, he does have the little tuft of hair on the top. I don't know if maybe Homer Simpson, maybe, I don't know, was inspired by it. I'm trying to think of what actually came first, The Simpsons or Goonies. But he's got the little tuft of hair happening on top. Kind of looks like Bert from Sesame Street as well. And as mentioned, he's got the Superman t-shirt with some suspenders on the side. I had red suspenders growing up as well. I also had nightmares growing up as well, thanks to Goonies. The ripped pants, as you can see, and he's got himself kind of leggings, socks underneath. I guess these are more socks than anything else, not leggings. The socks don't go, unfortunately, all the way to the bottom because you are then treated to articulation in the feet. Now, the thing about it, though, Chunk doesn't have the articulation, the hinge joint. Now, these are what I believe to be older released figures, not as old. Like, for example, if you compare it to Bob Ross, I think the Bob Ross is the newer of the two. And yet, Chunk also has, or Sloth also has, the articulation in the crunch. So maybe, again, all the adult-sized figures are now using the new articulation. And I'm trying to think of other figures that maybe would have used. I guess maybe he is probably using the same mold as the child Jason Voorhees. And therefore, that would justify probably why they didn't change out the ball joint systems or incorporate the additional hinge joints on the ankles like Sloth has here. Speaking of which, get a good gander at some Converse shoes. Looking nice on both sides. And these figures also do have peg holes in the undersides of their feet. Something else to mention that the newer figures, the new Retrocloth figures, seem to possess. For this guy's articulation, his head rotates all the way around. It hinges up and down. A little bit more of a tighter fit for head to neck versus Chunk over there. As I mentioned, he's got the upper torso crunch. Waist swivels. Try not to untuck the shirt in the process. Trying to keep nicely tucked in. There we go. Get that all tucked in. One good thing is at least the pants are velcroed, so you can kind of open them up if need be, tuck the shirt back in, and then, do a close-up shop down there. Arms hinge outward, forward and back. He's got the swivel on the bicep. He's got a double hinge on the elbow. I'm liking that. He's also got the swivel in the hands, liking that as well. Hinge back and forth. Sloth, though probably not could pull it off in the film, he can most definitely in Retrocloth figure form pull up a slightly splits, an almost complete splits on his legs. He's got a swivel on the top cut of the thigh, right there. You can see it, right there. He's got a single hinge on the knee. And then, oh, what a breath of fresh air. Just see fully articulated ankles on these new Retrocloth figures. I keep really saying that these figures are old. They're not really old at all. I think it's just the fact that we got teased and advertised that these figures, I think, were going to be coming out. I don't know if they got sidetracked, postponed, or whatever the story is behind it, but I think we were supposed to be getting these ones sooner. They're now starting to surface. A lot of people have already probably picked these ones up for themselves. I love Goonies, so this seems like a no-brainer. I want to pick up this 2-pack and add it to my collection. Obviously, the inevitable question pops up in my head, and maybe pops up in your various other heads as well, because you guys are all smart viewers, is whether we are actually going to be getting other members of the Goonies clan. I mean, certainly I would love to see Mouth and Mikey at the very least. Get those as a 2-pack and maybe throw Data in the mix, a 3-pack, if you will, of the smaller kids. And I think that would be enough for me. I mean, again, you could throw everybody in the mix if you wanted to, but I think at the end of the day, if I could get Mikey, Mouth, Data, and of course Chunk and Sloth, I would be considering myself a very happy Goonies fan. Now you'll have to excuse me as I again sing the praises of the Retrocloth toy line from NECA Toys. This line continues to be the place where you would find lesser known obscure characters based on movies from our childhood making long overdue appearances. The very idea that we would ever get ourselves a Chunk and Sloth in a regular 7-inch format probably doesn't make too much sense, because from a cost standing, I mean, it certainly is a lot more expensive to produce a mold from scratch. With the Retrocloth line, you essentially only really need to sculpt a brand new head, hands in some cases, and then feet in some cases. The rest of it is using a standard buck body that they use for their Retrocloth figures, and they're simply just tailoring new outfits over top of it. That's why, where we haven't gotten them in 7-inch formats, we've gotten the likes of Ace Ventura. That's why we've gotten the likes of Bill and Ted, Weird Al, and most recently, the Goonies, Chunk and Sloth. I love the Retrocloth line for just being that. A place, yes, that doesn't fit into the same scale as the other 7-inch format, but it certainly has been a place where all the characters I ever would have wanted to see figures actually see a light of day. And that's why I really hope that NECA Toys continues to want to produce the RetroClaw toy line, because like I said, we're getting a chance to get Goonies, Chunk, and Sloth. Let that sit in. We've got ourselves figures based on the Goonies, Chunk, and Sloth. Both figures look fantastic. Sort of leaves me empty, hoping that maybe we'll eventually get the rest of the Goonies. If they're able to at least release them in 2-packs or 3-packs, I gotta imagine that they could probably make use of the exact same body that they did with Chunk. Chunk doesn't really have any real, quote, chunk to him. They could probably use the exact same body for the likes of Mikey, Mouth, Data, and more. I hope that can be the case. And while I don't feel like Sloth is empty without, Chunk is included. I mean, I'm glad that they included Chunk to be with Sloth. You couldn't just package, I feel, Sloth on his own. I most definitely would hope that NECA Toys can give us the rest of the Goonies that I could put fully out on display. What a neat looking set as well. I'm going to have to go back. My nostalgia itch is starting to tingle. I'm going to have to go back and maybe watch the Goonies again. I'm pretty sure this time I'm not going to have a nightmare. I'm sure my mother will probably get a phone call a little bit later. I had a nightmare. You watched Goonies again? I watched Goonies again. Have you picked up this set for yourself? Let me know down below in the comments section what you guys think of the new Goonies Chunk and Sloth RetroClaw figures. Really neat looking figures. And again, a big thank you to the folks over at NECA Toys who were nice enough to send this my way. If you guys are new to this channel, long-time viewers, never got around to it, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. If you want to stay and keep your peepers peeled for more content to this channel, make sure as well you turn on the bell notification and stay tuned, because there's going to be a whole lot of stuff coming your way in 2020. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.